Chapter 1597, Tragedy of Imperfection Pancakes and Waffles. The two were almost identical, but also infinitely different, like two sides of the same coin. Just like both the gods and the chaos creatures were born from the everlasting void, both pancakes and waffles were made from the same ingredients. However, the end result was not the same. Perhaps there was a deep philosophical lesson to be learned from how two things made from the same ingredients could end up so vastly different. But Sonny did not particularly care. He did, however, care about waffles and pancakes. It wasn't hard to make either, but there was endless depth in the deceiving simplicity of these staple breakfast foods. Making pancakes was both an art and a kind of science. Waffles were even more elusive. Even with Sonny's potent transcendent mind and perfect physical coordination, it took him a long time to master the challenging art of making them. Still, his ultimate goal, a perfect pancake and a perfect waffle, were still out of reach. And doomed to stay forever out of reach, because imperfection was one of the governing laws of existence. It was tragic. Perfection might not exist, but I've gotten damn close to it. Every cook had their own approach, but as far as Sonny was concerned, the secret of a near-perfect waffle was letting the batter rest in the icebox for exactly one night, which was why he had prepared it in advance yesterday. For pancakes, though, he preferred to use fresh batter. Not wishing to make the guests wait, he manifested his shadow as an avatar and went about preparing both at the same time. While his avatar was busy with the waffles, Sonny used his original body to make the pancakes. The process was both simple and intricately complex. First, he broke and separated the eggs, then poured the yolks and the whites into separate bowls. He then carefully blended milk and melted butter into the yolks while whisking the whole thing. At the same time, Sonny manifested a pair of shadow hands to whisk the whites, using a bit of his transcendent strength and speed to hasten the process. Finally, he combined baking soda with vinegar and mixed that with flour, sugar, and salt. Baking powder would have worked as well, but it was currently in short supply in Bastion. So, soda and vinegar were going to have to do. Aiko glanced at him, both of him, with all his 6 arms, shook her head, and returned to her work. Now came the most important part. As soon as the whites were beaten to have stiff peaks, Sonny carefully combined the flour mix, the yolk mix, and the whipped whites together, creating batter. This was where most wars were fought among the pancake enthusiasts. Some swore on lumpy batter, some considered anything except a perfectly smooth blend heretical. There were various factions in between the two extremist camps, too. Sonny himself was a moderate, standing by a precise and immaculate balance between smoothness and lumpiness, which he had painstakingly discovered after countless attempts. Most things worked best in moderation, after all. When the batter was ready, he put a pan on the fire and waited for it to grow hot, while simultaneously letting the batter rest a bit. Then, he used a large spoon to pour a portion of the batter into the pan, watching with satisfaction as it formed into a neat circle. The rest was just a matter of skill. Sonny waited until bubbles broke on the surface of the pancake, then flipped it with one smooth, precise motion. Years of sword practice helped him perform the flip in the most efficient and spectacular manner. One serving of transcendent pancakes coming right up. Soon both the pancakes and the waffles were ready. For the final step, Sonny places a scoop of vanilla ice cream on each serving of the waffles, adding freshly cut strawberries on top. As for the pancakes, Sonny took a deep breath. Ancient texts mention that pancakes were ritually served with something called maple syrup. However, such a thing did not exist in the world anymore, and the ancient tradition could not be maintained. There were a few substitutes, sure, especially here in Bastion, which was famous for its forests. But the most popular one, he grimaced. Shaking his head, Sonny put butter on the pancakes, then retrieved a glass jar from the cupboard with a shaking hand. Finally, he poured some, some honey on top. Disgusting gods, I just don't understand people. Hiding his discomfort behind a polite expression, he picked up all 3 plates, dismissed the avatar, and went to serve breakfast to the guests. Aiko, make 2 coffees. Bait, Kim, and Luster grew lively at the sight of the pancakes and waffles he had cooked up. Sunny took a step back and secretly watched them take their first bites. He made an effort to hide his pride. Kim's eyes widened a little. These waffles have no vulnerabilities. He smirked subtly. Of course they don't. These waffles were made by a saint. Soon, Aiko came out of the kitchen with 2 cups of coffee. She placed them in front of Luster and Kim and walked away. At that point, Sunny noticed that the bottle of whiskey he had brought out earlier was still untouched. As he contemplated why the 3 survivors of the Antarctic Center ordered hard liquor early in the morning, Bait turned and waved at him. Oh, can we get 2 more glasses, actually? We are waiting for someone. Sunny lingered for a moment, then nodded and turned around to walk to the kitchen. As he did, he noticed that Aiko was still loitering near the entrance for some reason. What are you doing? The petite girl flinched, then glanced at him and touched her hair nervously. What? Nothing. Just then the silver bell rang once more, and a new customer walked in from the street, bringing with him the smell of verdant leaves. It was a gallant man wearing a suit of enchanted armor. His reserved but pleasant smile possessed a hint of warmth to it, which made his already handsome face even more attractive. The man was followed by an echo that resembled a monstrous hound, its fur as black as night. Aiko suddenly straightened and met the new customer with a bright smile. Master Quentin, welcome. The weather is very fine this morning, isn't it? Indeed, the gallant man was none other than Quentin, the healer and melee specialist of Sunny's old cohort of irregulars. Quentin's soul had been swallowed by the call when he lost consciousness during the siege of Falcon Scott. As a result, he was pronounced missing in action by Army Command, but no one had any illusions. Everyone, including Sunny, had thought him dead. However, the gallant healer proved everyone wrong. Somehow, he had not only managed to reach a suitable seed of nightmare in the hellish white desert without succumbing to its many perils, but also conquered that nightmare alone. There were a few people among the members of the evacuation army who had managed a similar feat, but still, Quentin's return could only be described with one word. A miracle. Sunny did not like that word too much, though. It detracted from Quentin's own effort, resolve, and incredible determination to survive. He was a man who had once clawed his way out of a cocoon made by an abominable spider, after all, while being digested alive. So perhaps Sunny should have given him more credit. In any case, Quentin had survived. His physical body had long been destroyed by the time he ascended, so the spell created a new one for him, sending it to the citadel where he was anchored at that time. Sunny had only learned about it a few years after becoming a saint. Knowing that the gallant healer was alive brought him a bit of solace. Before, he was under the impression that most of his soldiers had perished. Now, he knew that only a half of them had, which was better somewhat. Maintaining a facade of polite indifference, Sunny silently pushed Aiko into the kitchen and showed Quentin to the table where Bait, Kim, and Luster were waiting. They met the healer warmly. Master Quentin, good morning. Hey, Quentin. Well, if it isn't Mr. Big Shot Ascended. Quentin smiled in embarrassment and took a seat. Sunny followed Aiko into the kitchen, ignored her glare, and retrieved the additional glasses. Strange. He had opened his shop in Bastion because that was where most of the people he knew were. There were not that many good restaurants here yet, and certainly very few run by a master, not to mention the memory side of the business. Therefore, it was inevitable that he would run into an old acquaintance or two sooner or later. Since his services were top-notch, The brilliant emporium gained many customers through word of mouth. Those old acquaintances recommended the new place to people in their circle, so it wasn't that odd to meet someone Sonny had known, on occasion. Plus, many of the people he had known were also people Aiko knew. Still, it was strange for an impromptu meeting between the survivors of the Antarctic Center to happen in his cafe, all of a sudden. If it had happened before, Sonny would have thought that Faded was pulling the strings of fate behind the curtains. But he was free of such concerns now. Coincidences were nothing more than coincidences, and they did happen. Free. Sonny smiled neutrally as he placed the glass in front of Quentin. Would you like something to eat? The healer made an order and Sonny left. As he was walking away, he saw Kim pouring the whiskey into the glasses. The sound of laughter disappeared and the smiles disappeared as well. The four of them remained silent for a few moments, their faces solemn. Then they gulped the bitter liquor down. The fifth glass of whiskey remained standing on the table, untouched. Sonny had an idea of what his customers were going to talk about, so he dove into the kitchen, not wanting to listen. Aiko was there, waiting for him with a dismayed expression. She whispered angrily, "Why did you push me away? Boss, listen, I can serve that dreamy, serve Master Quentin and his friends myself. You just rest." Then she noticed something on his face and grew silent. A couple moments later, Aiko sighed. "You are being strange again." Sonny glanced at her impassively, then said with a shrug, "Those guys are from the 1st Evacuation Army, and they are here for a reason. Leave them be." She coughed awkwardly. "Oh, I keep forgetting that you were in Antarctica as well. Sorry." Sonny did not make a secret of the fact that he had gone through the Southern Campaign, without going into details, of course. That was because the situation there had been extremely chaotic, and many people ended up being forced to challenge nightmares with no warning. Few managed to survive them alone, like Quentin, though. Still, it was easy to explain where an absolutely unknown master had popped out from by simply saying something like, "Oh, I sort of stumbled into a nightmare in Antarctica." That was also a perfect conversation killer, dissuading people from asking further questions. In short, it was very convenient. Sonny patted Aiko on the shoulder and went to cook Quentin's order. "Get ready, the breakfast crowd will arrive soon." He cooked another omelet, brewed some coffee, and delivered both to the gallant healer. Retreating to the reception desk, Sonny picked up the monster almanac and continued to read. He could not help but catch bits and pieces of the conversation his former soldiers were having. After the initial solemn atmosphere, the mood at their table gradually turned lighter. They joked, laughed, and shared news about themselves. Listening to the sound of their laughter, Sonny remained silent. At some point, though, his expression changed slightly. Quentin was talking at the moment, his pleasant voice tinged with a complicated emotion. "Oh, I heard something strange a few days ago, by the way." Luster raised an eyebrow. "Good strange or bad strange?" The healer shrugged hesitantly. "I'm not sure. You see that thing, the winter beast, apparently it's gone." Kim and Bate looked at him sharply, their eyes turning colder. "Gone? What do you mean, gone?" Quentin shook his head. "It seemed like someone, or rather something, killed it. You know how hard it is to catch glimpses of the southern quadrant, but apparently the evidence suggests that it was killed years ago. We just didn't know." A long silence settled over the table. Then Kim poured the remaining whiskey into their glasses and raised hers. A pale smile appeared on her face. "Good, that's good then." Turning the page, Sonny sighed subtly. Of course, he knew that the winter beast was gone. He was the one who had killed it, after all, ripping the wretched thing apart with his own 2 hands. Well, it was in the past now. Right now, he was running low on coffee beans and a bunch of other ingredients. Worse than that, his memory business was not doing that well. This was the kind of problem Sonny was facing in the present. The 4 survivors of the Antarctic Center finished their meal. As a good host, Sonny saw them off, then remained on the porch for a few moments, looking as they walked away. However, he did not have time to waste. By then, there were several other customers waiting to be served, so he sent Aiko to the dining hall and hid himself in the kitchen. Manifesting a second body, Sonny concentrated on preparing food. Mornings were a busy time in the brilliant emporium, but the 2 of them were managing fine. Sonny had 2 bodies and could manifest as many hands as he needed, while Aiko was a perfect waitress, simply floating the dishes to the tables with her telekinesis. After an hour or two, the breakfast crowd dwindled and gradually cleared out, leaving the interior of the marvelous mimic empty once again. Sonny washed his hands and leaned back on the shadow chair, while Aiko was counting the money they made. With the increase in human population of the sword domain, it was not convenient to simply use soul shards as currency anymore. Credits, meanwhile, were a purely digital currency. So, the great clans had recently started minting their own coins. Each coin contained a small amount of essence, and their value was supported by the shard treasuries each clan possessed. Sonny did not really care about the matters of economy, but Aiko was all about it, constantly pestering him to think about converting the brilliant emporium into a bank and making his money make money by lending it out to less affluent people in Bastion. The possibility of capitalizing on the first mover advantage in a new world almost made her drool. That said, the petite girl was not really serious about these fanciful dreams, since she understood that growing too big would land them in the steel embrace of valor as well. In any case, Sonny spun a heavy silver coin between his fingers, studying it with a distant expression. One side of the coin had a number on it, while the other was embossed with the image of a sword piercing an anvil. He could feel a minuscule amount of soul essence contained in the silver, ensuring its authenticity. This essence could also be directly absorbed, which was why many awakened carried a few coins with them at all times, just in case they found themselves in dire straits. The coins my mimic makes are much more valuable. Granted, the marvelous mimic had few opportunities to consume someone here in Bastion, so there were not a lot of these coins around. And speaking of the marvelous mimic, Sonny shifted when he felt the brilliant emporium tremble slightly. It was as if the shape-shifting shadow was shivering in fright. Boss, they're here." Aiko hurriedly dashed toward the kitchen and hid behind the door, peeking from behind it with a concerned expression. Sonny sighed, then stood up and headed toward the door. "It's time, then." Walking outside, he mentally prepared himself. Out there on the front lawn of the brilliant emporium, an adorable wolf pup was sitting, staring at him with shining eyes and wagging his tail excitedly. The little wolf was undeniably cute. However, the problem was that he was also the size of a bull. Sonny looked at the lawn, which had been torn by the wolf pup's claws, and grimaced. "Little Ling, we talked about it. Human form, remember." The puppy tilted his head in confusion, his ears flopping side to side. Then his body shimmered subtly. Sonny averted his eyes. In the next moment, there was the sound of rushing air, and a man's voice resounded from a bit further down the street. "Ling Ling, summon your clothes." A childish voice answered a moment later. "Boot Daddy. Right now." Sonny waited for a bit, then looked down. The wolf pup was gone, and there was an equally adorable 4-year-old boy standing in front of him, dressed in a simple tunic. Further down the street, a good-looking young man was pushing a sizable cart toward the emporium, beads of sweat glistening on his forehead. He gave Sonny a friendly smile. "Master Sunless, sorry if we are a bit late." Sonny wanted to answer, but at that moment the little boy smiled brightly and shouted, "Uncle, With that, he pounced at Sonny and hugged him. Sonny gasped, turning a bit pale, and was pushed back a couple steps. His bones groaned. Ouch! The strange pair were from the Beast Farm, which was where Sonny purchased most of the fresh ingredients used in the brilliant emporium. They were making a delivery. Of course, they were also Effie's husband and child. The huntress swore that she named her son Ling in honor of the leader of her first cohort, but Sonny had his doubts. In any case, little Ling was a unique existence. He had been born in the void at the heart of Ariel's tomb, and therefore treated as a challenger when the nightmare was conquered. So little Ling had become a transcendent as an infant. The child saint was now a darling of humanity, famous across both worlds. The good-looking young man, meanwhile, was the nameless awakened Sonny had once welcomed back from the first nightmare. That guy was not exactly famous, but definitely infamous. Many people treated him with a peculiar mix of envy, admiration, and fearful sympathy. After all, being married to one saint and a father to another was not for the faint of heart, especially considering the fact that his wife was none other than raised by wolves, and that it had taken little Ling a while to start learning how to control his transcendent strength. Depending on one's point of view, that guy could either be called the luckiest or the unluckiest person in the world. Poor bastard. Little Ling was indeed getting better at controlling his strength, but that did not mean that he was good at it. Suppressing a groan of pain, Sonny struggled to inhale and cautiously patted the adorable boy on the head. Little Ling, dear uncle can't breathe. Sonny had experienced a lot of bizarre things in his life, but the nameless guy really took the cake. It must have been one hell of a conversation when Effie came back from a routine mission as a saint, with a baby in tow despite only being in the 3rd month of her pregnancy, saying that the baby was somehow also a saint. Sonny did not even want to imagine. In any case, Effie and the nameless guy seemed to have worked things out in the end. In fact, their relationship was strangely picturesque and idyllic. Their son was growing up happily, too, bathed in endless care and affection. His mom was now one of the 5 transcendent powerhouses of the government, as well as one of the most well-known and beloved protectors of humanity. His dad, meanwhile, had gone into the dream realm on the winter solstice, a month after the cohort returned from the tomb of Ariel and became an awakened. He possessed a utility aspect having to do with mending, restoration, and cultivation, as well as golden hands. Now, the nameless guy was managing a large farm that he and Effie had established on the beautiful meadow contained within her supreme memory. That farm was the source of many ingredients Sonny used in the brilliant emporium, so he received visits from the nameless farmer often. Which was why the marvelous mimic was afraid of little Ling. The cute boy possessed an endless amount of enthusiasm, like all children did, and the power of a transcendent being. Therefore, he was nothing short of a walking disaster for furniture, appliances, and even buildings. Sonny did not know how Effie's house was still standing, but the mimic had suffered greatly despite being a powerful devil. Sonny had suffered greatly, too. As he extricated himself from little Ling's embrace, thanking Bone Weave for keeping his ribs intact, Sonny shook his head in dejection. Well, it's my own fault. He just couldn't resist the adorable brat, so every time they visited, Sonny treated him to something tasty, like hot chocolate, waffles, or ice cream. Who knew that a child's fondness could be bought that easily? Therefore, Sonny didn't have anyone but himself to blame for being the target of little Ling's affection. As soon as the little boy let go, he looked at Sonny with huge eyes and smiled bashfully. Auntie Aiko. Sorry, Aiko. Sonny smiled and pointed behind himself. Oh, she's in the kitchen. His only saving grace was that Aiko seemed to be the energetic puppy's favorite. So, he heartlessly hid behind the petite girl every time the duo arrived. Yay! Little Ling disappeared behind the door. A moment later, the marvelous mimic seemed to shake a little. The nameless guy had brought his large cart over by that point. Sunny looked at him and nodded politely. "Nice to see you, Ling's dad. How is it today?" Ling's dad panted for a few moments, then grinned. "Great, we were finally able to cultivate a strip of raspberries, in addition to what we already grow in the garden. The fields are taking well to the new fertilizer, too. Oh, and we are thinking of procuring more cattle, considering how high the demand for fresh milk has been lately." He pointed to the cart. "Plus, with all the enchanted items you made for us, my life has become much easier. So this time I was able to bring everything on the list: milk, eggs, tomatoes, flour." He listed all the things in the cart, leaving Sunny to contemplate for a few moments. "That's good. I won't have to search for many substitutes in the waking world. Still, Bastion is still far away from being self-sufficient, so there is no choice but to go." Indeed, although humanity's presence in the dream realm had expanded dramatically, they were still dependent on the waking world for countless things. As far as Sunny was concerned, things like coffee beans, chocolate, salt, and a bunch of other commodities could only be procured on the other side. Which was a bit of a pain, considering that he had to act as a master. So, every time Sunny wanted to go to the waking world, he had to enter the castle and pretend to use the gateway there. At least he didn't need to come back through the dream gate. That would force him to interact with people from Valor way more often, and way more closely, than he wished to. He nodded at Ling's dad and offered him a hand. "Let me help you unload everything." As they were unloading the cart, he asked nonchalantly, "Oh, how is your wife doing, by the way?" Ling Dad smiled, a glint appearing in his eyes. "Effie, she is doing great. Soul Reaper and she have just returned from suppressing a minor gate crisis in the Eastern Quadrant. The casualties were minimal, so everyone is celebrating." Sunny sighed. As much as the situation in the dream realm had improved for humans, the situation in the waking world was slowly getting worse. There were more gates, and those gates were more powerful. Even with resource shortages being greatly relieved by the mass migration to the other world, the infrastructure was still reeling from losing Antarctica. So the government was busier than ever. Not only were they working to establish a firmer foothold in the rapidly changing dream realm, but they were also working hard to contain the growing menace of the nightmare spell. Luckily, it was not only the legacy clans that had become much stronger after the chain of nightmares. Although the government did not have many saints, their awakened forces had grown tremendously in recent years, mostly due to many veterans of the evacuation army choosing to remain in service. And the few saints the government did have were up there with the mightiest champions of the great clans. Soul Reaper Jet, raised by Wolves and Nightingale. The three of them were worth a dozen less powerful Transcendent, if not more. Ling's dad straightened, wiped his brow, then almost blinded Sunny with a smile. "Ah, sorry, I forgot to mention. She'll be coming by in a short while." Sunny blinked a couple times. "She Transcendent Athena, she'll be coming by." The nameless guy nodded happily. "Yes, she had a meeting to attend in the castle, so I just told her to meet us here." Sunny froze for a moment, then smiled politely. "Ah, in that case, it seems I'll be busy in the kitchen soon." His face did not betray any emotions, but he was a bit rattled on the inside. What is up with today? He had wandered the dream realm alone for about 3 years after becoming a saint, only returning to the embrace of civilization a year ago. So, the brilliant Emporium had not been open for too long. In that time, Sunny had brushed sides with some members of the cohort, but it did not happen often. And definitely not in any kind of meaningful way. Which was how he preferred it. He was being contradictory in that desire, perhaps. After all, The very reason Sonny had chosen to open his shop in Bastion was because many of his old friends were here. Well, there was another reason as well, but that was the deciding factor. Still, while he could maintain a level of nonchalance while meeting people like Teacher Julius or the irregulars, it was different with his former companions. Being close to them was both sweet and painful, but mostly painful, which was why he both yearned to see them and preferred to avoid them at all costs. Sonny knew that getting closer to the cohort members would only bring him anguish and torment. Nevertheless, he was sometimes tempted to abandon reason and ingratiate himself into their company once again. Luckily, in the end, reason always won. In any case, calm down, you brought this on yourself anyway. Not only was the brilliant emporium bound to attract the attention of local powerhouses eventually, but there was also Aiko. There were less than 100 survivors of the Forgotten Shore alive now, and she was one of them. Many of the firekeepers were on friendly terms with her, so they visited her place of work often. Sadly, that did not translate into memory sales. As the elite battle force led by Nephites, they not only had access to the best weapons and equipment the great clan Valor could supply them with, but also spent most of their time on calamitous battlefields, earning plenty of powerful memories of their own. Kai and Effie were among Aiko's friends, too. That was how Sonny had established the partnership with the Beast Farm in the first place. He sighed and beckoned little Ling's dad. "Please come in. I'll pour you something cold and refreshing while you wait." The two of them carried the ingredients into the kitchen, witnessing a peculiar scene. Little Ling was giggling as he jumped around like a rabbit, reaching his small hands toward Aiko. The petite girl, meanwhile, had sought refuge at high altitude and was floating near the ceiling with a distressed expression on her face. Auntie, come down." She threw a resentful glance at Sonny, sighed, and glided to the floor. Catching the little boy, Aiko nimbly spun him around and then patted him on the head. Here, I'm down. How about we get you some ice cream, Wolfie? Just be a good boy." The rascal immediately put on a subdued expression and looked at her with his huge eyes. His entire being expressed nothing but well-behaved obedience. "Little Ling is a good boy." At the sound of his solemn voice, Aiko couldn't help but smile. "All right, then let's go." Soon, the little boy was sitting at one of the tables and happily swinging his legs in the air. In front of him was a bowl of ice cream, adorned with freshly cut strawberries. The ice cream was disappearing with a frightening speed. His dad, meanwhile, was drinking a glass of cold lemonade as he watched the street through the window. Sonny was looking at the contents of his icebox, wondering if there would be anything left for other customers after Effie was done plundering his cafe. Soon he heard the sound of the silver bell ringing and an excited yelp. "Mama-ye!" Then there was a sound akin to a torpedo hitting the hull of a warship, and the entire marvelous mimic shook. Dust spilled from the ceiling. Letting out a sigh, Sonny turned around and left the kitchen. Effie was perhaps the only person who could withstand the full force of little Ling's excited pounce without being pushed back or reeling. She had easily caught the brat and raised him into a tight hug, laughing. The boy was hanging from his mom's tall body like a monkey. "Hey there, dumpling, missed me." "I'm not a dumpling, I'm a boy." All right, but why are you so tasty?" "Muami." As Effie pretended to bite little Ling, he giggled happily and squirmed in her embrace. Sonny observed the scene while suppressing a smile. Despite the flow of time, Effie had not changed at all. She was still the same tall, beautiful, and vibrant woman Sonny had met in the Dark City. Her athletic body was still brimming with boundless vigor and vitality, her perfect lean muscles rolling under the dewy olive skin. Of course, there were changes, too. Effie had grown even more appealing, her transcendent allure capable of bringing countless men to their knees. There was a subtle but palpable presence about her, too, Perhaps it had always been there, but now there was no mistaking it. Wherever Effie went, the air brimmed with liveliness and energy. Everyone around her felt a certain primal intensity permeate their bodies, infusing them with stimulating, spirited force. Such was the effect that Saint raised by wolves, one of the most famous and beloved warriors of humanity, had on people. Carrying little Ling, she walked over to where the nameless guy was sitting, hugged him with one hand and kissed him on the cheek. Then she looked at Aiko and grinned. "Hey there, shorty. Gods, have you grown even tinier? I really can't, Aiko, you're so cute. Every time I see you, I just want to squeeze you and dress you up." The petite girl frowned. "There will be no more squeezing happening today. Thank you very much." Effie laughed. "That stupidly gorgeous boss of yours as well. Ah, he's just like a porcelain doll. If I wasn't a married woman, I would have definitely tried dressing him up. Or, undressing him would be fine too." Aiko's eyes widened, while little Ling's dad spat out his lemonade. Effie's smile turned a little strange. She fluttered her lashes sheepishly, then coughed. "Oh, he's standing right behind me, isn't he?" Effie slowly turned around, just in time to notice the unreasonably gorgeous proprietor of the brilliant emporium falling. 3 cups of coffee that he had been carrying on a tray were flying into the air in slow motion. It seemed that he had tripped. Without missing a beat, the enigmatic shopkeeper regained his balance with a graceful half-step, extended his hand unhurriedly, and caught all 3 cups on the tray without spilling a single drop. A moment later, he smoothly approached the table and placed the cups down, acting as if nothing had happened. Then, the nonchalant young man smiled pleasantly and gave her a respectful bow. "Saint Athena, welcome." Effie found herself unable to speak for a moment. Damn so cool." At the same time, Sunny was nothing short of panicking on the inside. What the hell? No, what the actual hell? I mean, what the hell? How could she go and say something like that? And right in front of her husband, too. Did that woman have no tact? Glancing at Ling's dad covertly, Sunny noticed that the young man was looking at him apologetically. He seemed more embarrassed than anything, with no signs of anger or insecurity written on his handsome face. It seemed that the nameless guy was used to his wife's antics. Well, it made sense. Why wouldn't he be? Sunny had been teased relentlessly by Effie. What made him think that the poor bastard would have had it any easier? If anything, as her husband, he probably had it way worse. Effie, meanwhile, smiled and said in a reserved tone, "Oh, Master Sunless, you were here." It stung a little. The fact Effie used his name instead of a nickname, like she did with her close friends, stung. The fact that she made an effort to act with decorum around him stung, too. Even not being openly teased by her caused a dull ache in his heart. But at the same time, seeing her healthy and well made him happy. Being around her felt familiar and nice, too, even though he was nothing but a dull, unassuming merchant in her eyes. A passing acquaintance not deserving of a second thought, unremarkable and easily forgotten. Someone not worthy of her time, let alone attention. In fact, it was strange for her to even remember his name. But that was the best Sunny could hope for. For now, he nodded politely. "Indeed, I took the liberty of making some coffee for you to enjoy while the food is being prepared. Aiko, you take a break and keep our esteemed guest company." Effie was being uncharacteristically taciturn, probably because she felt uncomfortable around a stranger. She was also looking at him strangely. If Sunny did not know better, he could have even imagined that she was feeling shy. But surely that was impossible. Bowing again, Sunny turned around and fled into the kitchen. Of course, he made sure to make his retreat seem calm and dignified. As he was walking away, though, he couldn't help but hear little Ling giggling. "Haha, clothes are itchy. Can mommy undress Ling Ling too?" Feeling his ears burning, Sonny dove behind a door. Damnation! Right, he had to concentrate on cooking. Knowing Effie's appetite, nothing less than a veritable feast would do. Sonny did just that, manifesting an avatar and several pairs of shadow hands. Slicing, dicing, washing, roasting, boiling, simmering, stirring. He had to do a lot of things at the same time just to distract himself from thinking too much. Thankfully, his other two avatars were busy at the moment, as well, increasing the load on his consciousness. An idle mind was a restless mind, so Sonny preferred being busy. Nevertheless, he couldn't help but hear bits and pieces of the conversation happening in the dining hall. "Shorty, is your boss single? I have someone in mind to set him up with." "Single? Actually, he's double. I mean, there's two of him." "Huh. In any case, leave my boss alone. Every time you people show up, my career takes a nosedive. First in the Bright Castle, then in NQSC. I swear to the dead gods, Effie, if another of my employers decides to enlist and become a war hero after spending time with you lot, I'll take it personally." Are you still angry at Kai? Actually, he asked me to pass a message to you. Tell that pretty bastard to keep his messages to himself. Unless he wants to help me sue himself for unlawful termination, I don't want to hear a word from him. Hee, bastard, bastard. Ling Ling, don't say that word. Sonny shook his head and let out a sigh, thinking that Aiko was being too harsh on Kai. Actually, Effie and her were not that close. The two of them were on friendly terms and shared a deep bond as the survivors of the Forgotten Shore. Sure, but back then, Aiko had lived in the Bright Castle, while Effie had been a huntress of the outer settlement. Their paths had not intersected often. Another point of connection between them was Kai, who knew the petite girl much better from their days of paying tribute to Gunlog. Aiko had even worked as his manager after returning to the waking world. So, when he chose to end his idle career and enlist in the military, she lost her job. As a result, Aiko seemed to be holding a grudge, which was a bit sad, considering that she was one of the main reasons why Kai had ended up as a saint in service of the government, to begin with. Kai's life could have been safe and comfortable as an awakened, but he had chosen to follow Sonny and the rest of the cohort into the Second Nightmare, and later joined the Southern Campaign. One of the main reasons he had done that was the shame he felt about not having done anything to help Aiko when she was being harassed by one of Gunlog's pathfinders, the bastard whom Nephi's had eventually killed. So Kai never wanted to be powerless to help people like Aiko and Aiko herself ever again. That was his motivation to seek strength and continuously put himself at risk as one of the government's champions. What a messed up situation. The web of human relationships was like that, and sometimes it seemed that people were helplessly stuck in its complicated embrace. Sonny, on the other hand, had been forcefully freed from that web. And yet, his situation was just as messed up. He chuckled. There was no salvation from the human mess anywhere. It was not every day that a famous saint visited the brilliant Emporium, so Sonny went all out with cooking up a feast. And Effie was, without a doubt, very famous. The world had changed a lot from the day he awakened. Back then, there had been barely a few dozen transcendents in existence, each representing the absolute pinnacle of human tenacity and achievement. They were distant and dazzling, like living legends. Today, though, there were more than 100 saints out there. They were still revered and venerated, and each of them was still an absolute elite, an exalted warrior and champion, the best of the best humanity had to offer. But still, not all saints were made equal. All of them were remarkable, but some were more remarkable than the rest. In general, the 100 transcendents were often divided into 3 loose tiers. The lowest tier, if such a description could even be applied to these legendary figures, was the largest, and mostly consisted of those saints who had reached transcendence after the Southern Campaign. They were younger and less experienced, and their path to sainthood had been a little easier than that of their predecessors. So, these undoubtedly outstanding warriors were still considered a bit weaker than the rest of the saints. The middle tier consisted of the few most talented representatives of the new generation, as well as of the old guard, of those seasoned veterans that had reached transcendence before the chain of nightmares. Saints like Sky Tide, Summer Night, Silent Stalker, Bloodwave, and Wake of Ruin were among them. These powerhouses wielded fierce powers and possessed a frightening amount of experience, each towering above the rest of humanity like mythical giants. However, there was still someone above them. Each of these unique individuals was a singular existence, a presence that broke all the rules. Their terrifying power could hardly be measured, and they stood apart from even the saints, inferior only to the sovereigns themselves. There was no word for what these people were, but everyone knew their names. The government possessed three of these exceptional champions, raised by wolves, Nightingale and Soul Reaper. Clan Song possessed three as well. They were Mordred, Sation, and Beastmaster. And lastly, Clan Valor possessed two. They were Nephi's and Morgan, the Sword Sisters. Of course, there were saints of equally terrible power who were completely unknown. One of them was Cassie. The other one was Sunny. And that was pretty much it. So it wasn't an exaggeration to say that a very famous saint was currently visiting the brilliant Emporium, saying that she finally understood what the female fire keepers had been talking about when they mentioned the Eye Candy Cafe. Sunny frowned subtly. Eye Candy Cafe? I haven't heard of it. Do I have a new competitor? New shops and restaurants were popping up in Bastion almost every day, so he was not very diligent about keeping up with the competition. Whatever, all the more reason to make sure that Effie is satisfied with her experience in the brilliant Emporium. Then she can tell the fire keepers to stay loyal to it, her own soldiers as well. Although the government awakened have fewer coins to spend, there are a lot of them. Eventually, he used one of his bodies to start serving the dishes. Various side dishes, a mountain of dumplings, tender barbecued meat, black bean noodles, steamed buns, spring rolls, red rice cakes, and perfectly cooked rice. He had really outdone himself this time. Panting, Sunny wiped his hands on the apron and smiled pridefully. Back in the dining hall, Effie had already demolished half of what he had cooked and let out a satisfied sigh. Ah, this is great. Then she gave his avatar thumbs up and added, "Can I get another one of everything?" Sunny's smile wavered. After Effie was done with her meal, she stayed for a while, catching up with Aiko. They had invited Sunny to join them, but he politely refused and returned to the reception desk, pretending to read the Monster Almanac. Therefore, he accidentally heard Effie sharing some information about the meeting she had attended in the castle. It's about the winter solstice, of course, which is today. By tomorrow, many sleepers from the waking world would be sent into the dream realm, scattered all across its territory. With how many humans are here now, most will find their way to the nearest settlement without much problem. The rest will be picked up by the patrols we've jointly established. Well, apart from those who are unlucky. She grew quiet for a moment, and then added in a somber tone, "Of course, there very well may be poor bastards like us too. Since not all regions of the dream realm have human presence, they can be lost. No one wants the Forgotten Shore to be repeated, so this time there is an initiative to widen the search area. Valor is even sending a team into a death zone." Aiko frowned. "Let me guess who is going to draw the short straw. They're going to send Changing Star, aren't they?" Effie sighed. "Yeah, my poor princess can't catch a break. Well, of course, it's all a ruse. The real reason they are sending her there." She lowered her voice. "Is the Lord of Shadows." Sunny turned the page of the Monster Almanac, his face remaining perfectly neutral. Aiko, meanwhile, raised an eyebrow. "Lord of Shadows, who is that?" Effie gently caressed little Ling's head. The boy was resting his head on her lap, fast asleep. His dad, meanwhile, simply listened to their conversation while sipping coffee with a smile on his face. The huntress shrugged. He's just a rumor, but since Valor is taking action, I guess he's not after all. In any case, there has been a lot of talk about a mysterious saint appearing in the death zone between the Sword Domain and the Song Domain not too long ago. If he really exists, and has been able to survive there alone for so long, then he is immensely powerful. Of course, both domains would want to obtain his allegiance. She hesitated for a moment, then added darkly, or if that is not possible, to make sure that no one else gets him. I guess they are sending Nephis to test the waters. Shaking her head, Effie remained silent for a few moments and then laughed. Can you imagine? I mean, has Anvil lost it or what? Don't get me wrong, I love Princess, but really, she is probably the worst person in the world to use as a negotiator. Sunny couldn't help but agree. Of course, what Effie did not know was that the person Nephis was supposed to negotiate with was sitting just a few meters away, having just served her a delicious dinner, so. They are finally starting to move. Sunny let out a quiet sigh. Things were progressing according to his calculations, but at the same time, he felt that it was sometimes unpleasant to be right. Many things had changed since Antarctica, but many things were also the same. The balance of power was entirely different. For example, Sunny had been born at the time when the three great clans were in charge of humanity, so for the longest time, he simply assumed that that was the natural order of things. But actually, although some legacy clans had always been more prominent than the others, the three great families, Valor, Song, and Night, only rose to their exalted status shortly before he was born. And now, the status quo had changed again. Even though there were still nominally three great clans, in practice, only two remained. The House of Night had lost its competitive edge for a multitude of reasons, the main being that it lacked a sovereign. Without a sovereign, the masters of the Stormsea could not bring millions of mundane humans into their area of influence and develop their citadels into prosperous cities. They could not keep up with the exploding number of awakened, masters, and saints the other two great clans now commanded, either. In short, the House of Night had been relegated to the role of a supporting player in the great game between Valor and Song. The role of the government was not the same, either. Now that the sovereigns had revealed themselves and the exodus of humanity from the waking world had quietly begun, the writing was on the wall. As the force mainly responsible for maintaining the cradle of humanity, the government had no choice but to become obsolete. Perhaps it was not going to happen in a decade, or even several decades, but their days were numbered. Unless the government changed, that was. And so it was changing, slowly developing its presence in the dream realm. Strangely enough, despite the bleak future, the government's power had actually grown in recent years. Although there were not a lot of saints in its employ, three of those saints belonged to the highest tier of transcendence. There were countless awakened, and a large number of masters remaining loyal to the army as well. So the government had actually shortened the gap, and was now almost as powerful as the House of Night. It was nowhere near the two nascent kingdoms of the dream realm, though. And those kingdoms, Sword Domain and Song Domain, had changed the least. The war between the two great clans was not being fought in the open, but it had never ended. The only thing preventing it from progressing to direct conflict was that the two domains did not share a physical border. Yet, but in fact, the territories of Song and Valor were dangerously close to each other. It was just that they were separated by a perilously dangerous death zone. That death zone was doomed to become the first battlefield of the inevitable open war between the two dream kingdoms. It was also where Sunny had established his citadel, right in the middle of this exceedingly important strategic region. and where his third avatar was currently hunting down anything stupid enough to challenge his rule. His thinking was simple. He had to put himself in an advantageous position for when the war inevitably started. Because after 3 years of wandering the dream realm alone and slowly losing his mind, he realized that he didn't want to observe the end of the world and the birth of a new one from the sidelines. He wanted to be right in the middle of everything, shaping the outcome to fit his will and achieving his goals in the process. Well, anyway, that was the third avatar's problem. The second avatar was keeping an eye on Rain and cautiously exploring the hidden side of Ravenheart. This Sunny, meanwhile, was simply running a shop and occasionally feeding gluttonous saints. "Hey there, Master Sunless, can I ask you a question?" Sunny looked away from his book and turned to Effie. "You certainly can, Saint Athena." Effie hesitated for a moment, then smiled mischievously. "Is Sunless really your name? You know, I'm not saying that it sounds like something an 8th grader would call himself, but I'm also not saying that." He stared at her with a polite expression. "Didn't you name your son Dumpling?" Effie flinched. What? No, Ling, his name is Ling. It's the name that belonged to a dear friend of mine." Sunny smiled and turned back to his book. "My mom, you see, had a poetic soul." He hesitated for a moment and then added nonchalantly, "Also, I never attended school, so I wouldn't even know what an 8th grader would call himself." Effie, little Ling, and little Ling's dad eventually went on their way, leaving a mountain of dirty dishes behind. Sunny used his avatar to wash them while resting on the porch and listening to the lively sounds of Bastion. Although his shadow sense could reach far and wide, he didn't dare use it right under Anvil's nose. The King of Swords possessed unrivaled authority within his domain, after all, and few things escaped his gaze. Chances were he would send someone exploring his capital through unseen means, so Sunny kept to himself. Soon the midday crowd arrived, and he spent a couple of hours in the kitchen cooking various lunches. That crowd disappeared as well, leaving the brilliant emporium empty. Sunny was drowning in a strange melancholy after meeting Effie. The time she had spent in his restaurant had felt very uplifting, but now that she was gone, only wistfulness remained. It was his birthday as well, but she didn't remember. No one did. Honestly, even he had almost forgotten about it himself. What was the big deal anyway? Suppressing a sigh, Sunny closed his eyes and concentrated on his other avatars. That was another advantage of existing in several places simultaneously. He was almost never bored. So Nephi's is coming. It was not unexpected but happened sooner than he had thought. How long would it take her to find the nameless temple, knowing Neph? 2 weeks at most. So he had 2 weeks to mentally prepare himself. That was probably enough time. Rain needs better arrows too. Time passed swiftly while he contemplated various matters. Then a new customer arrived. This one, however, was not here for a meal but rather for a memory. The silver bell rang once more, and a new customer walked in. Sunny was idly wondering what they would order when he noticed who it was. A moment later, his eyes glistened with professional interest. It was a young woman wearing light armor and a white cape and awakened. Her elegant beauty and golden hair were lovely, but her expression was cold and composed, creating an uninviting impression. Sunny did not really care about what she looked like, though. The aloof awakened was important because she was one of his clients and had come to retrieve a memory. More than that, she was a legacy, which meant a hefty commission and a great boost to the brilliant Emporium's reputation. Plus, she was a passing acquaintance from Sunny's former life. Even though they had only met a few times, hers was still a familiar face. He smiled and bowed politely. "Awakened Tell, welcome." The young woman glanced at him sternly and nodded. "Master Sunless, I'll be leaving Bastion soon, so I wanted to check on your progress. It would be convenient if you procure a suitable memory before I depart." He couldn't help but widen his smile a little. "It is good that you decided to pay the brilliant emporium a visit, my lady. In fact, I have just recently acquired something that might be of interest to you." Sonny did not make a big secret of the fact that he could craft memories, but he was hiding the extent of his abilities. So, for the more demanding commissions, he pretended to be a mere merchant. Very few people knew what he was really capable of. For most, it seemed like he simply possessed a network of connections that allowed him to find and purchase suitable memories in a timely fashion. Sonny signaled Aiko to hold down the fort and invited Awakened Tell to follow him downstairs. Passing through an ornate wooden door, they descended a set of stairs and entered the spacious basement of the marvelous mimic. There, a large chamber was illuminated by the soft light of enchanted lanterns. The furnishing was luxurious, but tasteful, exuding elegance and class. Various memories were displayed in glass cases that were attached to the walls, sharp steel glinting on dark velvet. No sound from the upper floor reached this silent place, creating a solemn atmosphere. In short, Sonny had nothing to do with designing how the memory boutique looked. It was all Aiko's work. The petite girl possessed much more knowledge on how to actually sell memories, both because she had been close to Stev, the caretaker of the Bright Castle's arsenal, and because she had run the actual operation of Sonny's brilliant emporium in the past. Plus, she was generally savvy when it came to business. Aiko had explained her rationale well to make Sonny sign off on all these expensive furnishings. They were much more awakened now, but good memories were still quite expensive. In that sense, they were much closer to luxury goods than to common tools. Therefore, a memory shop had to cater to a luxurious clientele in order to seem reputable. The classier it looked, the more inclined affluent clients would feel about spending their coins here. Although Aiko had complained that the brilliant emporium had only sold one memory in the last 2 months, it was actually not that bad of a result. In fact, Sonny only had to sell a memory once in a while to keep the business afloat. Selling one every month, meanwhile, would be more than enough to turn a large profit. Right now, the main problem he faced was not weaving memories, but actually crafting them. Since Sonny did not want to reveal his secrets, he was reluctant to partner up with external specialists. Therefore, he did everything alone, playing the role of a blacksmith, jeweler, tanner, tailor, carpenter, and so on himself. He was surprisingly good at it. Well, actually, it was not very surprising. Sonny had learned the basics of craftsmanship a long time ago. Every awakened knew how to survive in the wilderness, which included maintaining their equipment, constructing shelter, sewing up wounds, and many other things. Additionally, he deepened his knowledge of all kinds of crafting while learning to weave memories. That knowledge was then put to the test when he lost access to the nightmare spell, and had to survive in the remote regions of the dream realm alone for 3 years. Most importantly, though, Sonny was a weaver. His ability to craft weaves of essence strings made all other forms of craftsmanship seem accessible. He also had a golden touch due to consuming weaver's phalanx. Lastly, he was a transcendent. His dexterity, physical coordination, and precision were unrivaled. His senses were vastly superior to those of mundane humans, and his mental acumen was far beyond the norm. In short, Sonny had put a lot of effort into mastering his trade, and was confident that he would not lose to the famed forgemasters of Clan Valor when it came to the quality of his craftsmanship. Although he was somewhat envious of all the tools and resources they had access to. Awakened Tell could not see it, but there was more than one chamber in the basement of the marvelous mimic. Sonny also had an expansive workshop hidden behind the boutique, containing everything he used to do work, from a forge and a kiln to a pottery wheel and a sewing machine. There was also a large storage room where various materials, mostly sourced from the carcasses of nightmare creatures, were kept. It had not been easy to arrange a proper workshop in the basement of the marvelous mimic, let alone an opulent boutique. The interior of the shadow was somewhat of a separate dimension, after all, and although Sonny had managed to alter the weave of the original covetous coffer to make it capable of containing living things, it wasn't really suited for it. Above ground, the problem was easily solved by having the marvelous mimic manifest windows, which could let in air and light. Below ground, though, things were a bit tricky. In the end, Sonny had to create enchanted lanterns for illumination and heat plates for warmth. The air, meanwhile, was supplied by inferior copies of the quintessence pearl placed strategically here and there. The marvelous mimic supplied the essence needed to keep these enchanted items working itself. That arrangement had the side effect of turning the interior of the marvelous mimic into an isolated environment that could sustain human life. Or any kind of life, really. Even if the shadow was buried deep underground or fell to the bottom of the ocean, even drowning in a volcano was not going to present much of a problem. But that was beside the point. Sonny had no intentions of drowning in volcanoes anytime soon, or better yet ever. Walking to a rich mahogany display table, Sonny put on black woolen gloves and retrieved an elegant lacquered box, placing it down carefully. Then he opened the lid and smiled at Guiltythree politely. "Please take a look." Inside the box was a memory that he had recently finished crafting. Inside the lacquered box, an intricately engraved vambrace was laying on black silk. It was forged from a light silvery metal and decorated with a pattern resembling interlaid feathers. The vambrace emanated a feeling of restrained power, and just from a passing glance, one could tell that it was an extraordinary item. Guiltythree, however, seemed unimpressed. Well, from what Sonny could remember, she always seemed that way. The young woman raised an eyebrow. "Master Sunless, from what I remember, I commissioned you to procure a suit of armor." He smiled. "Your memory is stellar, my lady. But don't be concerned. This vambrace possesses a rare enchantment that allows it to unfold into a full plate of impregnable armor, just like what you wish to purchase. The process only takes a second and consumes very little essence. While such a trait might bring a slight inconvenience in case of a sudden attack, it also makes this memory uniquely adaptable." Tell's eyes gleamed. "I assume that it can be used by a saint." Sonny nodded. "Indeed, it can accommodate any type of transformed creature up to about 50 times the size of an average human. The speed with which the vambrace unfolds remains the same. Of course, the essence expenditure grows in proportion." He continued to smile, but really, Sonny wanted to cry on the inside. That was because it took him an incredible quantity of magical alloy to create the damned vambrace. The thing looked small, but he would have had to bankrupt the brilliant emporium in order to purchase the materials needed to forge it, if anyone would even sell them to him. In the end, he had been forced to track down and kill a dozen corrupted beasts with metallic carapaces to complete the commission. Which meant that Sonny had not suffered a loss, but he could have sold all that transcendent steel instead. His heart was bleeding. In fact, he was even lamenting the cost of the expensive lacquered box, with silk furbishing that Aiko had made him buy for the vambrace. But it is for a good cause. Sonny had to remind himself why he had put in extra effort to make sure that this memory was particularly potent and durable. Guiltythree finally showed a hint of satisfaction. She studied the memory for a few moments, then asked in a slightly warmer tone, "You have conducted a thorough study of its other enchantments, of course. What are they? Oh, and what is its name?" Sonny carefully picked up the vambrace and began the description. "My lady, this transcendent memory of the fourth tier is called the Belated Apology. Apart from the unfolding enchantment, it also possesses 3 others. One vastly enhances its physical durability. The other grants the person wearing it greatly increased protection from elemental attacks. Finally, the third enchantment might interest you the most. It allows the master of the memory to make it as light as a feather. Unbelievably, a smile appeared on the young woman's stern face. Well, of course it did. That set of enchantments was almost perfect for an armor-type memory. That's perfect. That is exactly what my father needs. Sonny hid a smile and put the vambrace back in the box. Then he asked, pretending to do it only out of politeness. "Oh, and how is St. Roan doing?" Indeed, the young woman in front of him was Lady Tell of the White Feather clan. She was the daughter of St. Tyrus and Master Roan, although the latter was also a transcendent now. Sonny had bumped into her a few times in the sanctuary of Noctis, and later in Falcon Scott. To his shame, though, he had never known that the standoffish girl was actually the daughter of his benefactors, mostly because of how young her parents looked. Determining the age of awakened was a messy affair. It was only after coming to Bastion that Sonny realized his mistake. Tell smiled a little. He's doing well, apart from lacking a good transcendent armor, and still being in the doghouse because of having challenged the third nightmare against Mother's wishes. She fell silent abruptly. Wait, why am I telling you this?" The young woman looked at Sonny with wide eyes. Then, strangely enough, she blushed a little and looked away. "Well, in any case, both of my parents are fine. They are awfully busy, of course." Sonny was a bit perplexed by her reactions, but just shrugged mentally. Unsurprising. There were very few legacy clans being led by two saints. The White Feather's prominence had risen greatly since their exile to Antarctica, and therefore so had their duties. No one could discard them anymore. Sonny smiled and lowered his head with respect. "That is good to hear. I wish them all the best." Young Lady Tell of White Feather ended up purchasing the belated apology and leaving the brilliant emporium in good spirits. Aiko was happily counting the money, as well. And since Sonny knew that the memory he had painstakingly created would serve St. Roan well, he was in a good mood, too. Not long after that, evening came. More customers visited the brilliant emporium to enjoy tea and snacks after a long day of work. The evening crowd receded, and the sun disappeared beyond the horizon. Moonlight and darkness enveloped the streets of Bastion, and the city slowly grew quieter. Aiko left, leaving Sonny in the empty cottage. He cleaned up the dining hall, and then went to the porch to breathe some fresh air. Looking at the thriving city surrounding him, full of countless people, Sonny felt painfully alone. Especially today, he couldn't help but feel it sharply. Sonny remained on the porch for a while, watching the pale moon slowly move across the starlit sky. Then he sighed and went inside. "I'll clean up the kitchen, then go to bed. Everything else can wait until tomorrow." This day had been strangely eventful. He was busy washing the kitchen utensils when the silver bell suddenly rang again. Surprised at the appearance of a late customer, Sonny raised an eyebrow and walked into the dining hall. "I'm sorry, but we are about to close." The words died on his lips. Out there in front of him stood a delicate young woman in a sea-wave cloak. Her hair was like a cascade of pale gold, and her eyes were hidden behind a strip of blue cloth. Despite the blindfold hiding her eyes, the young woman's ethereal, otherworldly beauty was simply breathtaking. She lingered for a moment, then turned her head in the direction of Sonny's voice. "Oh, I am sorry. I'm afraid I'm a bit late then." Sonny remained silent, trying to overcome his shock. What is she doing here?" He suppressed his emotions and put on the polite smile of a humble shopkeeper. No, it's no trouble. What did you want? I'll prepare it quickly." The young woman tilted her head a little, then said hesitantly, "My name is—" He interrupted her, trying to put an appropriate amount of respect and reverence into his voice. I know who you are, Lady Song of the Fallen. Who in Bastion doesn't? I am the owner of the brilliant Emporium. You can call me Master Sunless. It's an honor to meet you. Cassie sighed, then nodded curtly. Eventually she said, I heard that you can procure rare memories, or make them. Sunny froze for a moment. One of the firekeepers must have recommended him to her. And knowing Cassie, it must not have taken her long to discover that the owner of the brilliant Emporium did not just sell memories, but also crafted them. But why would she come to him? All the enchanters of Clan Valor were at her disposal. Sunny took a deep breath. Are you interested in commissioning a memory, my lady? She nodded again. In a way. He smiled. Now he was in familiar territory. Great, I am sure that you won't be disappointed in my services. Just today, a member of the renowned White Feather clan purchased a memory from our stock. They were extremely satisfied with its quality. Cassie smiled, then shifted slightly as if looking around. That is good to hear. The memory I want you to make must be of the highest quality. She lingered for a few moments, then turned to him and added in a neutral tone. Oh, and by the way. Her smile wavered a little. Happy birthday. A vast white plain was shining under blinding sunlight. It seemed deceptively endless, devoid of any features. No living thing was moving across its surface, and none would dare to. Changing Star of the Immortal Flame clan was kneeling on that plain. She had been kneeling there for 3 days without moving a muscle, and even her right hand was frozen in the air, holding the hilt of a silvery sword. Its blade was like a radiant mirror reflecting a boundless white void. Her impassive face was showing signs of fatigue, but her beautiful gray eyes were cold and sharp, full of indomitable resolve that bordered on obsession. Her silver hair was moving slightly in the wind. Lady N.F.I.'s the wind. Staying still like a statue, she spoke without looking back. I know, stay strong. There were a few moments of silence, and then another voice spoke. I don't know how much longer I can endure. Nephi's answered evenly, white sparks igniting in the depths of her calm eyes. Stop talking unless you want to die. She wasn't threatening the man, simply stating a fact. In response to her words, there was silence. The wind blew across the white plain, crashing into her with furious force. There were a few gasps from behind Nephi's, and yet no member of her retinue allowed themselves to be shaken by the squall. The only thing that moved was the torn veil of ominous gray clouds. It swirled and flowed, slowly obscuring the merciless sky. Not that Nephi's could see it, frozen as she was. All she could see was the shadow slowly spreading across the flawless white plain. Where the shadow of the clouds was cast, the white surface lost its blinding radiance, becoming easy to look at. As Nephi's watched the radiance dim, her face remained motionless. Her heart, however, started beating faster. Finally, the stormy veil repaired itself, and the sky became completely hidden behind it. The blade of Neph's sword was extinguished, reflecting nothing but a swirling expanse of gray clouds now. The clouds were glowing brightly with diffused and scattered light. She let out a quiet sigh. Behind her, bodies hit the ground in a clatter of metal, and pained groans tore apart the silence. Nephi's remained motionless for a few moments, then lowered her sword and slowly stood up. This one was long. Turning around, she looked at the 7 masters that were sprawled on the ground, panting as they tried to recover from 3 days of torturous stillness. Shim, Kaor, Shakti, Seed, Gorn, Gantry, and Urlas. They were the fire keepers that had followed her into the death zone on this mission. The rest were in less dangerous regions of the dream realm, searching for young sleepers. Far away. There had been a time when Bastion, located in the heartland of the dream realm, was separated from Ravenheart by an immeasurable distance. Ravenheart was situated far northwest, after all, on the outskirts of the Hollow Mountains. But Awakened had conquered a lot of territory in the last few decades. Led by the great clans, humans had greatly expanded their area of influence in the Dream Realm. The two enclaves had swallowed many regions, and yet they still did not share a border. In the south, both the Sword Domain and the Song Domain bordered the Storm Sea, which was ruled by the House of Night. In the north, the Hollow Mountains stood like an impregnable wall in the path of human expansion. The two domains were separated by a death zone, or rather, several of them, stretching from the Hollow Mountains all the way to the Storm Sea. This deadly territory widened in the south, but was comparatively narrow in the north, which meant that if the two enclaves were to be connected by land, the narrowest and northernmost region separating them had to be conquered. And that was where Nephi's and the Fire Keepers had been sent, to the death zone far in the north. This place, which had taken the lives of many powerful Awakened, had no official name. However, people often called it the Godgrave. The reason for it was rather simple. Turning her head slightly, Nephi's looked north. Out there, far in the distance, a titanic skull was laying on the misty slopes of the Hollow Mountains, staring back at her with one colossal, empty eye socket. Deep darkness nestled in its gaping chasm, still and foreboding. The other eye socket, as well as the forehead and the entire left side of the titanic skull, had been entirely shattered by some unimaginable blow. The bone splinters, which had rained down thousands of years ago, created mountain peaks of their own. The skull was connected to a white spine, which stretched south from the Hollow Mountains. In fact, it was connected to an entire skeleton of inconceivable proportions. From the top of the skull to the right knee joint, which was the southernmost intact point of the skeleton, it was at least 5,000 kilometers in length. The skeleton and the ground below it was the death zone. It was called Godgrave because Awakened, shocked and frightened by the terrifying size of the ancient remains, had speculated that it was the corpse of a god. Of course, Nephi's did not think the same way. In any case, the right hand of the skeleton lay in the Song Domain, while the left hand lay in the Sword Domain. By climbing the skeletal arms, one could travel along the bones of the titanic corpse. If they could survive the journey, of course, which very few could. The seemingly endless white plain where Nephi stood was actually the skeleton's breastbone. She had led the Fire Keepers here, climbing up the shattered left arm of the ancient corpse, fighting her way across its vast collarbone, and making progress south over the past 2 weeks. The progress was slow because they could not fly the chain breaker here. It was too dangerous. There were 3 ways of traversing Godgrave, ranging from deadly to absolutely lethal. The most suicidal one was to move across the ground, which was shrouded in twilight and covered by a carpet of ash. The death zones were regions of the dream realm where great, cursed, and unholy nightmare creatures dwelled, and in this death zone, the deadliest things were hiding beneath the ash. Anyone who stepped on it was doomed to be consumed. The second way was not much better. It was to travel in the great hollows of the titanic bones, hidden from the sky. The hollows were the safest place in Godgrave, and for that reason, they were home to an entire ecosystem of harrowing nightmare creatures and tainted flora, all hungering for the taste of human souls. Fighting through that monstrous jungle that thrived within the inconceivable skeleton was just as suicidal. The last way was to traverse the surface of the ancient bones. Here, there were fewer dreadful abominations, and those who did prowl the surface were a bit less powerful, but that was for a reason as well. The reason was that Godgrave had a peculiar nature. There were no nights here, and the sky was constantly shrouded by a veil of clouds. If the veil was broken, though, revealing the radiant white sky, anything that moved under the open sky was immediately erased from existence, turning into scattering ash. There was no exception to the rule, and no salvation from the gaze of heaven. So that was why Nephi's and the fire keepers had spent 3 days without daring to move a muscle. They had been waiting for the torn clouds to hide the sky once again. And now that the gray veil was mended by the wind, they could continue on their mission. To find the mysterious saint who was rumored to have made his home at the very edge of the Titanic breastbone, right before the abyssal chasm leading to the skeleton's spine. The man known as the Lord of Shadows. Nephi studied the immaculately white bone plain in front of her for a few moments, then turned around and looked at the fire keepers. They were gracelessly sprawled on the ground, with pained expressions on their faces. Even with their powerful ascended bodies, it had not been easy to remain completely still for 3 long days. If there was one consolation, it was that nightmare creatures they had been fighting when the merciless skis revealed themselves were nothing but ash now. The fire keepers, meanwhile, had all survived. There was a reason why she had chosen this particular cohort to follow her into the Godgrave. The fire keepers were a fearsome force even now, when the number of awakened masters and saints had vastly increased. That was because each of them was an ascended, and a cohesive battle unit consisting of close to 50 seasoned masters could not be ignored by anyone. Not to mention that the fire keepers were the survivors of the Forgotten Shore, and as such, could be easily called the most talented awakened warriors of their generation, all generations, perhaps. These warriors were her personal army, and under her leadership, their brilliant glory and fame had grown explosively in the past 4 years. The ivory tower, the chain breaker, the crest of the fire keepers, and her own name, Changing Star, had all become symbols of unrivaled virtue, valor, and excellence. Their names were known far and wide, all according to her conscious will and intent. The fire keepers were her heralds and emissaries, but each was also a heroic figure in their own right. Still, some of them had more renown than others. The 7 masters in front of her had once been Cassie's own cohort, and therefore they were a cut above the rest. That was not the reason why Nephis had chosen them for this mission, though. The real reason was that one of the members of the cohort, Erla's, possessed an aspect that could augment the endurance and stamina of his allies. Knowing what waited for them in Godgrave, she wanted to have his powers at hand for when the white void of the sky above the ancient corpse was revealed. As it turned out, her consideration had not been in vain. If not for his support, the last 3 days would have been much more torturous and potentially fatal for the members of her retinue. Even Nephis had felt the strain. Nevertheless, there was no time to waste. Looking at the fire keepers, she said evenly, "We have 5 minutes to recover, 5 more to drink water and eat. Then we continue south." Such a short span of time was not enough for them to rest their weary bodies, but it was better to relieve the fatigue on the move. The sky was not the only danger in this desolate bone expanse, after all. "Yes, Lady Nephis." The fire keepers groaned as they started to move. Storage memories were summoned. Water and field rations were hastily consumed. Shim, the leader of the cohort, used his healing powers to help the less resilient members recover faster. They were seasoned veterans and did not need her to tell them what to do. Nephis used the short rest to quench her thirst, as well. By the time the 10 minutes she had given her subordinates ran out, the bone plane was already starting to move. "Ready your weapons, forward." As she started to walk, the fire keepers followed her. Although the sun-bleached bones of the dead god, or whatever the ancient skeleton had been once, seemed like a continuous surface of solid white, in truth, they were littered with cracks and fissures. The deepest of those cracks led to the great hollows within the titanic bones, and the inner hell hidden in their horrid expanse. Merely 10 minutes after the veil of clouds had been mended, those cracks exploded with life. Tendrils of vibrant red moss and vermilion grass spread from them, devouring the flawlessly white surface of the ancient bones. Swarms of tiny nightmare creatures were instantly born, hunting each other as they moved between the stalks of grass. That was only the beginning. Since everything that moved under the merciless gaze of the white sky was instantly incinerated, the abominable life thriving in Godgrave had adapted to its whims. There was no way to predict when the veil of clouds would be torn, and how long it would take for the stormy barrier to repair itself. Therefore, everything here lived at incredible speed. The red moss, the vermilion grass, the tiny nightmare creatures, and the larger abominations that were yet to be born, all of them were in a hurry to be born, grow, consume, and propagate before turning to ash. The white plain was bare and featureless a few minutes ago, but in an hour or two it would be teeming with horrid life. If the veil of clouds was not broken for the next several days, Godgrave would come to look as if the infernal subterranean jungle had escaped the great hollows. By then, the most harrowing of the surface hunters would have been born and reached maturity, making the surface of the bones almost as dangerous as their inner expanse. But even now, Nephi's and the fire-keepers were already in danger. The predatory vegetation and the swarms of tiny critters were enough to envelop and devour a legion of masters. This was the death zone. Watching a sea of red slowly surround them, crawling closer with each moment, Nephi silently raised her sword. "Prepare!" As she brandished the silver sword, a wave of sparks exploded from where its tip scraped against the surface of the white bone. A moment later, each of the sparks exploded with a thundering roar, and a flood of white flame was unleashed into the world. The wave of fire rolled forward and enveloped a wide swath of the red grass, incinerating countless vermin in an instant. It did not stop there, though. Following Neph's will, the flames moved, turning into a wide ring around the fire-keepers. Then it spread in all directions like a flash fire, flooding the air with heat and ash. Soon, the vast bone plain had turned into a terrible white inferno. White flames danced across the bone plain, incinerating the vermilion grass and the swarms of tiny abominations that had just been born moments ago. Unbearable heat assaulted the cohort of the fire-keepers, and the air was suddenly full of swirling ash. The eyes of their lady burned in the haze like two cold stars. Mounts. A whirlwind of ethereal sparks surrounded the cohort, soon forming into 8 bestial echoes. Each of them was unique, but shared a common trait. Most of these echoes were not powerful enough to be of aid in a fierce battle. However, they were fast and could be ridden, serving the fire-keepers as mounts. Many masters spent considerable time hunting down suitable types of dormant nightmare creatures to procure such echoes. The braver ones hunted awakened abominations, while some lucky ones even had ascended beasts as their steeds. Nephi's was the exception to the rule, since the steel stallion she had summoned was an artificial echo created by the enchanters of the great clan Valor. Being the adopted daughter of a sovereign had its advantages, even if the royal gifts came with an insurmountable cost. Forward! The 8 echoes formed into a wedge and rushed across the burning plain, swiftly moving south. The sea of flames parted in front of them and then rolled forward, protecting the flanks of the formation. Nephi's rode at the head of the wedge, looking ahead with a focused expression. Her sword had changed form, turning into a silver lance. The fire-keepers were ready for battle, too. Despite the wall of fire that surrounded them, no one dared to lower their guard. And for a good reason. Soon, Shakti and Urlas, the archers of the cohort, drew their bows and let enchanted arrows loose. There were larger shadows moving behind the wall of flame, surrounded by ash, since the inhabitants of Godgrave had had more time to be born and grow here. From that moment, their advance turned into a tense and perilous affair. Nephi sustained the rolling curtain of flame, preventing the cohort from being consumed by the red grass, and led the charge. The fire-keepers met whatever nightmare creature the death zone threw at them with calm coordination. There were no great abominations on the surface of the ancient skeleton, at least not that soon after the white sky had wiped the slate clean. So, it was well within their ability to handle the onslaught of newborn monstrosities. Granted, the firekeepers were far more able than most masters. It was to the point that Nephis had time to think, without having to concentrate entirely on the battle. After a while, she thought silently. Cassie. A few moments later, Cassie's voice resounded in her head, as if the blind seer was there by her side, whispering into her ear. Yes. Cassie's powers had changed and grown after transcendence, as well. Her dormant ability now allowed the blind girl to learn more about the people and creatures she perceived. Her awakened ability allowed her to sense longer into the future. Her ascended ability not only allowed her to perceive the world through other people's senses, but also to communicate with those she had marked. So Cassie was like a spider waiting at the heart of a vast web. Even Nephis did not know how many people throughout the two worlds were serving as her eyes and ears, just that there were many, scattered around both the waking world and the dream realm. Some of the spies in the blind seer's network were willing agents, while others did not even know that they had been marked. The latter consumed more of Cassie's soul essence, sadly. Regardless, her ability to gather information was an incredible boon to them. It was just that. Nephis frowned slightly. The nature of her friend's power had changed subtly after the third nightmare. From what Cassie had shared, it seemed like her ability to receive visions of the future was compromised, somehow, making them strange and chaotic. Cassie herself had begun to act strangely, sometimes, as well. Nephis was concerned. Turning her steel steed slightly to avoid a large crack in the white bone, she thought, "Tell me about this Lord of Shadows again." The man she had been sent to negotiate with was more than a little mysterious. There were many more saints in the world now, true, however. It was still strange for an independent transcendent to exist out there, especially one whose origin and background were entirely unknown. Not to mention one powerful enough to not only survive in the Godgrave, but also make it his home. Cassie remained silent for a few moments. Then her voice resounded once again, whispering into Neph's ear. Not much is known about him, really. What we do know comes from a dozen sleepers who were unfortunate enough to be sent to Godgrave last year. They were all rescued by a mysterious saint and brought to a citadel under his control. The saint did not speak with them much and was rather aloof. In fact, some of them even describe him as sinister and frightening. Nephis had already heard all of this, of course. However, there was no harm in going over what they knew once more, just in case there was some hint she had missed. After a momentary pause, Cassie continued. He has to be strong, considering where his citadel is located. The sleepers also confirmed that his aspect has to do with shadows, and that he commands several powerful echoes. Apart from that, there's very little information about him. Instead of allowing the sleepers to place their anchors in his citadel, the Lord of Shadows escorted them out of Godgrave and sent them on the path to one of Song's strongholds. Nephis frowned. So he might be friendly with Clan Song. Cassie lingered for a bit. Both Valor and Song have their eyes on Godgrave. Considering that it is most likely to become the main battlefield of their war, how can they not? So, understandably, both domains are very interested in a powerful saint dwelling in the depths of this deadly region. Actually, Valor is not the first clan to try recruiting the Lord of Shadows. Neph's gaze darkened. Is it true that they sent? Cassie's answer came swiftly. Indeed, they sent Mordred, well, one of his bodies at least. However, he failed to persuade the Lord of Shadows to swear allegiance to the Queen of Worms. If the Prince of Nothing had succeeded, Nephis would not have been sent to find the reclusive saint. But how had he failed? It is strange, though, isn't it? I doubt that Mordred would have simply accepted a refusal. He would have definitely tried to consume that saint if persuading him was impossible. Cassie's voice changed slightly. That is the most interesting part. It is not confirmed, of course, but from what we managed to learn, Mordred was actually defeated. His vessel was destroyed. Nephi's took a deep breath. Is there really someone else capable of defeating that monster? She had once fought against Soul Stealer, after all. So, Nephi's knew better than anyone what Saint Mordred was really capable of. In fact, that man was no less of a plague than Skinwalker, whom most of humanity lived in constant terror of. If Lord of Shadow was really capable of fighting against the Prince of Nothing. Neff's calm gray eyes gleamed coldly as she contemplated the future. They crossed most of the remaining distance to the edge of the breastbone plain that day. Night never graced Godgrave with its presence, but anywhere else, the sun would have already been rolling toward the horizon. It was never dark in this strange and terrible place. The gray sky shone with diffused light, and white bone was colored here and there by fields of vibrant vermilion grass. Or rather, it was never supposed to be dark. Nephi slowed her steed as she peered into the distance, a complicated expression appearing on her face. What is that? Out there far away, it was as though someone had dropped a can of black paint on the world. The darkness, which was not supposed to exist in Godgrave, swallowed the plain, and the scattered light of the stormy sky was powerless against it. The deep shadows persisted, unperturbed by the bright daylight around them. How is this possible? Soon they drew closer to the wall of darkness. Strangely enough, there were much fewer abominations in this area of the Titanic skeleton, and even the scarlet flora seemed scarcer. It was as though even the nightmare creatures were wary of the land of shadows. Nephi's frowned slightly, not showing her hesitation to the fire keepers. Advance slowly. As they proceeded further, the light slowly dimmed, and the growths of red grass became smaller and smaller until they disappeared entirely. Soon, they were surrounded by nothing but impenetrable darkness, with only Neff's eyes shining in it like small stars. Stop! She remained silent for a moment, listening to the silence, then said evenly, Dismount. The fire keepers jumped down from their echoes, dismissing them into a rain of sparks. Their surroundings were illuminated for a few moments, and by the time the sparks dissipated into nothingness, they had already summoned enchanted lanterns. A flood of stark white light flooded the dark land. However, it seemed weak and faltering, barely able to force the deep, dark shadows to recede a little. Nevertheless, Nephi's did see something now that the luminous memories pushed the darkness back. A few meters away from them, a massive carcass was laying on the ground, its grotesque bones towering above the plain. The creature must have been enormous once, but now it was broken and dead. What killed it? Nephi's walked over to the carcass and studied it for a few moments, spending a bit more time looking at the clean cut where the monster's head had been severed. Lady Nephi's, what do you think? She lingered for a while, then shook her head. The head was severed by a sword, but something had gnawed on the bones. There are teeth marks everywhere, and by the look of it, the creature's flesh was devoured by something large. Most importantly, her expression grew a little somber. Considering where we are, this carcass must belong to a great nightmare creature. Had it been killed by the Lord of Shadows? If so, the rumors of his power might not be exaggerated. Many saints were capable of slaying great beasts, but very few could finish such a powerful abomination with one strike. Nephi's was about to say something else, but at that moment, a terrifying roar tore apart the silence. Something was rushing toward them from the darkness. The fire keepers instantly assumed a battle formation. Shim and Seed moved forward, raising their shields. Gantry and Gorn took positions a step behind and to the side of them, while Shukti and Erlas hid behind the melee fighters while summoning their arrows. Lastly, Kaor moved to the rear of the cohort, ready to defend his comrades in case of an unexpected attack. Nephi's remained where she stood, calmly looking into the darkness. Her lance had changed form once again, turning back into a longsword. "Be ready." They heard the sound of massive claws scraping against bone as the nightmare creature approached at high speed. Judging by that speed, the abomination was powerful. It was going to reach the fire keepers in a matter of seconds. Before it did, however, something rustled in the air, and they heard the familiar, gruesome sound of flesh being severed by sharp steel. Something crashed heavily onto the ground, and a moment later, a monstrous head rolled into the light, a river of blood spilling from its cut neck. One strike. Nephi's looked at the abomination's severed head for a split second, then turned to face the darkness. Their two crimson flames ignited, staring down at her. Then something walked out of the darkness and stopped at the edge of light, making the fire keepers tremble. What in the world? The graceful creature looked like a beautiful onyx statue that had come to life. Her fearsome black armor seemed to be carved from polished stone and forged according to an intricate, elegant design. The dark sword she was holding was smeared in blood, radiating a sense of chilling, inescapable lethality. The demonic statue towered above Nephi's and the fire keepers, much higher than even Effie was, observing them with cold indifference. There was no hostility in her gaze, but also no benevolence. She was clearly not human. However, the living statue did not seem like a nightmare creature either. She was more like a transcendent echo, a saint. However, Nephi's had never met an echo, or a saint really, who exerted so much pressure on her. The graceful knight's onyx body radiated a sense of vast, dreadful power, and the menacing crimson flames dancing in her ruby eyes were full of strange, inhuman will. She was strong. In fact, if Nephi's was not here, and the strange creature decided to attack the fire keepers, they would most likely all perish under her blade. The question was, would the living statue attack them or not? As Nephi's looked at the demonic knight calmly, ready for both outcomes, the beautiful onyx statue lowered her sword and turned away, then beckoned for them to follow her with indifferent grace. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and like the video and comment down if anything wrong in the story. And if have any suggestion to a new novel or want next part of any series, comment down. Our target is to get 1K subscriber. There will be surprise for all of you. Stay tuned.